Yes, good morning to you. I'm on the Westgate Bridge at the moment. I've just been witness to someone throwing their child over the bridge.
So, Westgate Bridge?
On the Westgate Bridge, leading into the city.
Okay, so you're going inbound towards the city?
Yeah, inbound towards the city, yeah.
Okay.
The guy's driven off, but we got his registration,
Okay.
and we can see the child floating in the water, yeah?
Hi guys, thanks for joining me. Woo! Today's case is one that I really struggle with. When I heard about it years ago, I struggled with it just in my head. But when I actually came to research this and really deep dive into how this played out, it just blew my mind. I have children. I'm sure many of you who watch my channel have children, and many of you will want to have children in the future. So we have a connection with nurture, and we have a connection with protection, and a desire more than anything to protect the most vulnerable in our society, whether they're our children or other people's. And it is incomprehensible to me when parents abandon that role. I appreciate that at times people go through the most horrendous mental health issues, and that can mean that they are not computing reality. Those of you who come to this channel regularly know my traumatic story in my own family, so you will be absolutely hyper aware of how much I advocate for people who struggle with mental health and how much I believe that we shouldn't use mental health as a reason behind horrific, heinous actions. But at times, in a small amount of killings, that is the case. I am going to start saying right now, I don't believe that is the case where Arthur Freeman is concerned. You are welcome to disagree with me. You'll have your own thoughts on this case at the end of this video. And please do let me know in the comments. I read them and I find so many of the comments so helpful, and it gives me different shades to my own understanding, but also to my understanding of cases, because you come from all over the world and many of you have also been involved in looking at these cases yourselves. So please feel free to leave those comments. Also, for those of you who are watching my videos on my Patreon and my YouTube membership, thank you so much. I do a full length video every single week as a minimum there, and other things going on as well behind the scenes, bringing you more content. I appreciate every single one of you who supports me there. I can't do this without you. And also it means that I don't have to worry about YouTube community standards, which I do have to on this channel itself. Also, you'll note behind me, because I'm sponsoring my own videos at the moment, because my book's out, The Serial Killer Next Door. It's available in all good bookshops, and also you can get it online if you like audiobooks, etc. And it's going to be out in the States in October as well. So thank you to each and every one of you supporting me. I am wearing my true crime merch. As you know, I'm a bit obsessed with bringing new designs, but this is one of my favourite true crime queen. So I've got a link below to all of that stuff, should you wish to. Right, let's talk about this horrific case. That's the only way I can describe this. And like I said, young people and children deaths are always going to affect me more than anything else. And it's not because I don't believe that life is absolutely incalculably important, no matter who you are. It is simply that I feel, as an adult human being, that it is my job to make sure that we protect those who are most vulnerable. And there is no one as vulnerable as young children. It's as simple as that. So when we lose a child in the most horrific of fashions, we can't help but feel that there has been a failing somewhere along the line to eventuate in that moment. And that's why in cases like this, I'm always looking for that chain of causation. Is there anything that could have happened that could have prevented this utter tragedy? Let's work that out as we move through this case. So let's talk about the perpetrator in this case, Arthur Freeman. His nickname was Ardy. I would say, looking back at his early years and his school years, he didn't have it that easy in school. So he was very often mocked by his friends and peers at school. He was one of those individuals who had a relatively easy target placed on his head. He was somebody who was very bright. He was an IT geek. He actually carried on with that interest. And let's be clear, when you look back at your childhood years, and many of us will do this, we can always remember those young people who really from the early age that we remember were engaged in things like spending lots of time online and being really interested in things as opposed to people, and having an absolute passion for a particular thing like IT. To some degree, back then, you might look at them and think, wow, you seem a little bit obsessed by something I'm not interested in. And that might mean that they end up more isolated than the other peers. But actually, on reflection, often these are the individuals who are going to change the world. These are the individuals with great minds. These are the individuals who may, yes, indeed, be very studious, and that equates to their bank balance 30 years down the line. So we've all been in situations where we've seen young people who weren't necessarily popular or in the in-group at school, who go on to do incredible things with their lives because they spent a lot of their academic time learning, as opposed to, I don't know, doing what I used to do, bunk off, hanging out under bridges at a certain time frame when I listened to rock music, hoping that the world would just happen for me, as opposed to maybe thinking about engaging in doing some work. What I'm saying is he fits that paradigm as a young person, but he's clearly been bullied, which is very, very difficult, but not atypical for children who don't necessarily play the game of being a young person and trying to be in with the in-group. So he's really good at computers, goes on to do computer science, gets his honours degree at university there, so clearly a very bright cookie. He was also said to be quite into sports, particularly tennis, so he played tennis weekly. He was also somebody who was really into bikes, and he kept busy with bike rides, and this was something that he did as a child as well. He used to like tinkering with his bikes, and he carried that on as an adult. And as money got easier for him, he enjoyed skiing trips. So as far as him not having maybe the easiest start in life because he maybe wasn't super popular, certainly as he moves through his years, he ultimately gets to a point where he's doing really well. Anybody out there, particularly if you live somewhere like the UK where we don't have, massive mountains with lots of opportunities for skiing, it's a rather expensive thing to do. It's an activity that people like me have never engaged in. Now, probably because I would seriously injure myself. And secondly, because economically, I was never in that place or space. So the fact that he's enjoying those things means that he probably does have excess money to spend because he's doing well in his career. And that should be how his life takes flight. That should be a mark of a man who is going to be able to indulge in fun, have a great life, doing what he's passionate about in work, and being able to translate all of that to what he's passionate about when he's got free time. Now, he meets Peta Barnes. They meet in Australia and they find each other attractive. They connect effectively. They're very different, but nonetheless, in spite of the fact that their personalities aren't necessarily in complete tandem, they get on well enough to get married. And in 1999 in Perth, that's what happens. Apparently, people who knew the couple, they said that they seemed like a really good match. He was basically quite introverted. He was more likely an individual who liked to play with things, and she was more relational. She liked to play with people. So she was more of an extrovert. And she was said to be good for him because he had that naturally introverted mindset. She was somebody that made him step outside of his comfort zone. She brought him out of his shell. Now, they end up moving to England and they live in Maida Vale. Now, for those of you who don't know the UK, Maida Vale is in London, but it's a super nice part of London. I actually know somebody who bought a place in Maida Vale a long, long time ago, and it's now worth £4.5 million. And genuinely, I would be devastated if that's what my money could buy. If I had £4.5 million, I'd want a castle. It's as simple as that. But it's a beautiful place. It's very central. It's kind of got a little culture and community of its own. So they're upwardly mobile. And they actually lived in London for more than 6 years together. And I suppose that's testament to their relationship early on. The fact that they're quite adventurous, they're trying new places to live, they're exploring new avenues, and they're doing this together as a team. Now, apparently, Freeman was amazing at the work that he did, particularly with databases. So he'd basically shone as a database administrator in London, and Peter was supporting him as his partner, and they go on the journey that so many of us do when we've got married. They have children, and they actually had 3 children, Ben, Darcy, and Jack. Now, every single one of those children were born in the UK. And apparently, when he became a father, he was doting, spent a lot of time with his children. He played things like beach soccer, clearly not in the UK. Let's just put that out there immediately. If you're going to play beach soccer in the UK, you're probably 2.5 hours away from hypothermia. But he got engaged with his kids in lots of different activities. He took Darcy to ballet. And one of the things that people said about Darcy and her father was that she was somebody who ultimately would seek out her father for hugs. So she was a daddy's girl. And that really lays heavy on my heart because of what we're going to talk about down the line. Now, in 2006, the family ended up transitioning again back to Australia. So they moved to Melbourne, an amazing place in Australia. Peta said, as far as she was concerned, that really demonstrated what she considered was an inflexibility with Freeman. He was very rigid, he was challenged by moving, and he was somebody who ultimately really struggled with change. He didn't enjoy having to relocate and having to engage in a whole new experience after he had built his life in London. And I think most of us can understand that psychological feelings involved with feeling displaced from a place that's been very familiar to you, and you have to begin again. And it takes a lot of energy, it's very exhausting, it can be incredibly draining, and it can also affect our mental health. That goes without saying. But pretty quickly after their move back, Peta and Freeman actually start having problems in their marriage, and ultimately they break up in 2007. She leaves him in March of that year. It feels as if immediately there is a real problem where he is concerned. He is not happy that she has left. And speaking of that rigidity and inflexibility, there is nothing more challenging than someone that has a desire for familiarity and things carrying on the way they're meant to. When that changes, ends, and creates chaos, all of a sudden, the very thing that they fear is presented, and it's presented in an enormous way because there is nothing bigger than the breakdown of your family. And it feels as if this fueled a particular mindset within Freeman. So according to Peta, there was this really concerning incident. So she and her now ex are chatting, and then she gets up because she has to leave. They're not living in the same address anymore. She's taking the children with her. But as she moves past him, he grabs their son, and their son's baby at this point. And she said that she genuinely in that moment just had this instinct that horrified her. She felt that he was going to take her baby and throw her baby into a fireplace. So she actually, when he's trying to wrestle this baby from her arms, she bites him. Also, thank God, her mother was present, and hell hath no fury, like women in general actually, but certainly if your child is dealing with an aggressive man and your grandchild is in danger, you are going to do everything in your power to prevent anything else going wrong in that moment. So her mother, God bless her, took a metal stroller that she had with the kids and slammed it on his back. And I applaud that woman's actions. Now, because they were so worried about what had just happened and it felt big, this isn't an incident that they just shoved to the back of their heads and thought, oh, it's just a one-off. There was enough going on in that moment to cause so much concern that they called the police. So that gives you insight. They're in a situation where, yes, they've separated, where, yes, he's got some inflexibility about change, but the analysis of that occasion that I've just discussed spoke to the grandma and the mother in that moment. And it said, this man has malevolent potential. Most of us, no matter what kind of a relationship we've had with a partner when it's broken down, would never conceive of somebody taking our child that we share with that person and that child being thrown into a fireplace. It just would not compute. You wouldn't even conceive of that being possible. The fact that she has even a speck of instinct that this man has such potential is absolutely terrifying. And I would say that that speaks to her having previously witnessed things that she feels are off. So on one level, she's talked about him being inflexible, that he doesn't like change. We could translate that psychologically to being a deeply controlling individual who likes things his own way. We can look at it like that as well. So the pair eventually divorce in 2008, that's the June of that year. He actually carries on wearing his wedding ring at this point. And again, that speaks of somebody who doesn't like letting go and ultimately is giving a message to the woman who now is divorced from him, which is, well, you can divorce me legally, but you don't necessarily get to divorce me emotionally. That's a very powerful message to give somebody who said, look, our relationship is over. Then the classic that we often talk about on this channel when it comes down to children, the custody battle. So neither of them are happy with one another, it's clear. Let's be honest. Peter will not be the ethereal, angelic ex, because no person is. And Freeman is certainly not an individual who's happy about the change in his life. And that leads them to have a lot of problems in their relationship now as apparent co-parents. Now, Freeman wanted apparently to be this huge part of his children's lives. I would 100% back that that's correct. Men are incredibly important. Fathers matter. And if you do have the joy and luck of having an ex who genuinely, authentically, and actually by action wants to be involved heavily in your children's lives, I think that's amazing. I think that that's absolutely paramount for children. I do also know that a lot of guys, and as well, a lot of women who've left children will be like, oh, I really want to be involved in your kids' lives, but they don't really financially support them. They let them down constantly on meetings. They pretend that their relationship is good when they actually haven't invested a great deal in it. But if you get the contrary to that and you get somebody who's really, really good, then it's absolutely powerfully important for a child to have that access. But again, the fact that he wants to be a huge part of his children's lives, and we should applaud that, doesn't necessarily mean that he wants to be a part of his children's lives for the right reasons. And there are always right reasons and wrong reasons in these circumstances. Now, according to a close relative, this is in November 2008, Freeman actually said that his ex-wife, Peta, would, quote, regret it if he lost custody. I cannot stand that kind of language. Seriously, I can't. I think that it is so aggressive. It's so nasty. You are saying that you want your ex to realise that if the courts decide that he is not the right person for the children and she is, that she's going to get punished. That speaks of an individual who's got that malevolence at heart, as opposed to saying, oh, what responsibility, what accountability can I take? If I lose custody, hey, maybe it's because I'm not that great a person. No, instead, it's, well, if she, because she actually is providing a good home and is protecting these children and is loving these children and they're thriving there, if she gets proper custody over me, well, because she's giving all these wonderful things to the children, I'm going to want her to hate the fact that she went ahead and did that. So I'm going to see her doing all the right things and I'm going to make her regret that she's such a great parent. Who in their right mind wants that when they've got their children with that person? Surely you want to see your children in the best circumstance with the best parent, ideally sharing custody, but if not, knowing why that person is the best choice. And so with the very fact that he's weaponizing language in that moment, again, it speaks of something fractured in his psyche. Now, up until the 28th of January 2009, indeed, the children had spent 3 days a week with each parent. Now, the only exception for that was an extended period from July to November 2008 when Freeman was in the UK. Now, this is where I find these kind of attitudes from certain parents so contradictory and hypocritical. So he's saying, if you dare get full custody of my children, there's going to be hell to pay, you're going to regret it. But by the way, I'm going to need you to look after the kids entirely from July to November 2008. So you can have them when it suits me. But then when I'm back, you better give me the children or you're going to regret it. It's just the pick and mix parenting model that absolutely annoys me because it's all on their terms. And that's another reason why I'm pointing it out. Because at the end of this, we're going to be looking at whether indeed the crime played out because of a mental health issue or because you're dealing with, I don't know, a cold-blooded sociopath issue. So I'm pointing these out just so you can kind of see some of the actions aren't in line with a guy who just wants what's best for his kids. So the reason he'd gone to England is he was sorting out his residency issues and he'd stayed with his friends at this point. The friends who he stayed with said that as far as they were concerned, he was very depressed at the time, he was very paranoid, and he was also very obsessive. I would also mention, therefore, that these people had probably not been around him for long periods of time, and we all know what it's like when somebody is living in our environment with us. And over time, we notice things that we might not have noticed before, because most of us have relationships with friends, and those relationships happen for hours a week or hours a month. You don't have that intensity, and you can really like somebody and spend a lot of time with them as a social experience, and then they can move in with you and you can hate it and you can see a whole different shade to that human being. So just because they're saying he was clearly depressed, paranoid and obsessive doesn't mean he was. It could just be part of his nature that he masks during the social connection that he would have had with them prior to this. But now they've got, like I said, that intense connection with him, that's spending time with him. They're noticing these shades of his personality they hadn't recognised before. Equally, we can say, you know, it is quite depressing to be living with friends whilst you're trying to sort out lots of administrative issues when you want to get back to your life in Australia. So that equally can play into why he's acting this way. Now, we get to a really pivotal moment. So on January the 28th, 2009, a family court had made a decision that they wanted to reduce his access to his children. Now, anybody who has kids and loves being around those children can completely empathise with how harrowing, devastating and terrible that would feel for him. We can absolutely acknowledge that it's awful to be told by a court that this is a decision, it's out of your hands, you have no control over it, and it's going to reduce the time that you have with the children that you love. But there's a reason why this had happened. So there was an assessment made by psychologist Jennifer Neo, and she had said that the reason that she wanted to reduce the access that he had was that Freeman, quote, tended to be irrational and contradictory and demonstrated passive-aggressive traits and seemed to cause chaos around him. So we are looking at this very schooled individual saying, there is just something about his nature that means when you spend time around him, there's not consistency, things don't feel organised, there's just something that doesn't feel altogether, shall we say, safe around the kids. Now, of course, Freeman disagreed with that report. He said that the assessment was really unfair. And again, we have all the empathy in the world. Maybe it even was a little bit unfair. But the point is, the wife, who he used to be married to, has not made that decision. His ex has just asked the courts to do so. He's the one who will have been assessed, and he's the one whose results will have been given to the court, and that's why the decision has been made. Now, that assessment, of course, meant that he had his access reduced. That meant that he would only have custody for one weekend a fortnight, and also he'd have a few hours on alternate Thursday nights. Now, that's a big drop, and I think that we can all have compassion for somebody who suddenly is only being able to be a very part-time father. Also, if you feel that you have now been put in a position where you're in some kind of battle with your ex and that they are winning, it can mean that you want to make it clear that they've played with the wrong person, that they've gone ahead and crossed the wrong individual. Just like he said, you screw up my connection with my kids, you're going to regret it. You know, he's already informed a friend of that. So now, when he realises that he's lost his power, he's lost his control, and bear in mind what we've been told about him, he's rigid, he's inflexible, this is something that is clearly going to fester. It's going to make him resent. It's going to make him really angry. Now, understandably, following on from those court proceedings, he's calling friends, he's saying how unhappy he is, he's saying he can't believe the outcome. He's also saying, listen, I'm going to make sure that I challenge this. So he was kind of talking about pursuing legitimate channels of review, which is absolutely the right thing to do. He also spoke to a friend and said, look, I'm going to take a personal development course because I want to counter the psychologist's conclusions. I want to fight for more time with my kids. And that is absolutely 100% compos mentis. That's what you do. You don't do something extreme. You don't do something destructive. You do something using the remedies of the legal system and you challenge them appropriately. And that's how he should have gone about it. And the fact that he's able to create those connections, to talk to his friends, to have those conversations that are clearly very cogent. He's able to express how he feels. He's able to talk about how unfair it feels, and he's able to think about some strategies and solutions that can make sure that he has a bridge back to his children. He then, because this is literally a day before the horrible thing I'm going to talk about in this video actually occurs. So he drives to his parents' house. This is in the seaside hamlet of Aries Inlet. This is where his 3 kids had been staying. So now he's gone back there, he has to make sure that he gets Darcy and the children back for the 29th of January. Bear in mind, he's got all of this bubbling beneath the surface because he's lost direct access on a regular basis to his children, at least at a level that he wants. So that's all going on beneath the surface when he drives to his parents, picking up his children to take them back, because on the 29th of January, it's actually Darcy's first day of school. And so Freeman had actually been arranging to take his children to school, which is a nice thing to do. And that again speaks of a father who we would hope is invested in his children's safety and protection and wants what's best for them. But the first thing that Freeman's dad noticed was that there was just something off about his son's behaviour. So Peter, his dad, realised he was really distressed. And there was another thing, he almost appeared like he was in a trance, to such a degree that he actually spoke to his son and said, look, I'll go back with you. I will come back with you. But Freeman refused. Now, if you think about somebody who appears to be almost in a trance, one person could say, well, that shows somebody who's going through some pretty severe mental health issues. That's an individual who could be, for example, dealing with some kind of psychotic break. And I would absolutely agree that that is possible. But we've all been in situations, haven't we? Particularly if we're somebody who's quite introverted or we internalise, where something has happened and we can be in a room with people we really like and we just don't want to talk because we are playing on loop the injustice that we might feel we have experienced. We are thinking about what we can do to level the playing field when it comes down to whoever's aggrieved us. And that can make us feel and seem very zoned out. So it could just be that he's upset, he's annoyed, he's angry, he's internalising, and he's just sitting and ruminating in his head as he's going to pick his kids up. And clearly that makes him seem zoned out. And he doesn't accept the help of his father. So Freeman ends up leaving the house. It's about 7:30 a.m. And bear in mind, what was meant to happen this morning is that Darcy, who's excited, she's excited. It's her first day at school. We all know when children have got something that's big girl experience or big boy experience, they can't help it. They've got no idea of what they're heading into. All they know is it's exciting. Darcy's mother was going to meet him at the school because she had Darcy's school uniform. So he knows this. He knows that ultimately on that drive, he is going to escort his beautiful daughter, and then she will meet her mother where she'll get her uniform. So at 7:30 a.m, he's driving his daughter, Darcy, aged 4 at this time, 4, and also her 2 brothers, Jack and Ben, 2 and 6 were their ages. So, you know, they're a very young family. I mean, what a thing to celebrate. 2, 4 and 6, gorgeous little differences in age where they're all going to be close siblings. And that's how this story should be playing out. But of course, I wouldn't be telling you this if that's how it ended. So he gets them in the car. They're heading for Melbourne that morning to drive to school. Now, during that drive, he ends up having a phone conversation in front of his kids. Let's bear this in mind. Now, I appreciate a 2-year-old is probably not internalising this and not hearing what's going on, not computing what's happening, although they'll understand tone. But the 4-year-old and the 6-year-old, if they are hearing him on the phone talking about his problems, that is such a breach of a boundary where a parent is concerned. Now, I appreciate that some of you might think that I've just got a super high bar for my expectations around parents, and hey, it's not the worst thing in the world talking about things negatively about an ex in front of kids. I just disagree. I believe fully in bringing up my children in a compassionate environment. I don't hit my kids. I've never raised my voice at my kids. And it's not a lie. I'm not exaggerating. I just think there's better ways around it. Equally, I know people who believe that shouting is the only communication that works with their children, whatever works for you. But genuinely, you should never do down an ex in front of your children. Literally. If you put my kids on a polygraph, they will tell you I have never said bad words about my ex-partner. And I'm sure that that ex-partner probably doesn't believe what I've just said, but I know it's true. And that's really important because it means that your children have grown up without feeling conflicted about their alliances. They're just allowed to like the parent for who they are, not for the myth that you've created about them. So he's on the phone with his friend, somebody called Elizabeth Lan. She was in England at the time. And he's crying and he's telling her that he feels like he's lost his children. Bear in mind, his kids are in the car. Just throwing it out there, Mr. Freeman. Your children are in the car. You're driving them for the first day at school. You haven't lost your kids. Yes, you've reduced contact. You've got them every other weekend and on a Thursday. But the point is, you've still got access to them and you can work on it. But no, he's lost his children. This is all or nothing, black and white thinking. And he also said that everywhere he turned, there were angry women. So it's not that he's the problem. That's what he's saying. You know, it's not that I'm actually the problem. Maybe all of these people are reacting to the kind of human being I am. He's like, no, everywhere I look, there are angry women. Now hold that thought because of where I'm going with this next action. So what I pull out from that is that the psychologist was female. He's like, she's just an angry woman. As if the psychologist has time to assess him and then go, I could just say he's a really nice guy and continue to let him have access full time to his children. Or I could be really angry and just say something awful so he gets it reduced. I mean, come on. And then the other side of it is his ex-partner. He thinks that she's angry. Why? Because she at one point thought you might throw a child into a fireplace, and the grandma in this case, she must be angry because she tried to protect the grandchild and her own child when he was being aggressive. But that's his takeaway from this. There are just angry women everywhere, as opposed to, hang on a minute, what's the common denominator? Oh, it's actually me and my personality. And the reason I'm pointing that out now is because the victim in this is female. So he's angry in this moment with women. Even though, ironically, he's on the phone to a female, telling her all his problems, like a complete hypocrite if every woman's angry. He's also selecting his victim shortly. And the difference between the victim he chooses and those that survive is that she's a girl. The conversation that he was having with that friend actually ended. Her phone battery died, sadly, and I imagine that's absolutely harrowing for Elizabeth Lam because she would likely have carried on conversation with him and potentially the outcome could have been different, but it must be so harrowing for her to reflect on that moment and just think, my God, a phone battery died and soon so too did a child. At 8:54 a.m, Freeman's ex-wife Peta rings him and she wants to know, where's Darcy? She's at the school. She's stood there with her mother, in fact, because clearly her mother wants to make sure that Peta is safe. No sign of the children. There's no sign of Freeman. In fact, what she hears in response to that totally acceptable and understandable inquiry is, say goodbye to your children. And then he hung up. She rings back, obviously frantic, what the hell's going on? Freeman says to her, you will never see them again. Bear in mind, you cannot imagine what is going on in that second in Peter's head, in the grandma's head, because they know. They know because they've had that instinct before. He is capable. He has something in him that is scary, something full of potential, something malevolent, and now he's saying you're never going to see the kids again. The best you can hope for is that he's lying because he's just angry. Mid-fear would be he's driving away. He's taking them out of state. What am I going to do? How will I find them? But ultimately, there's that other fear, isn't it? That something truly catastrophic is going to happen to the children. At this point, Peta tries to telephone her solicitor. She reports the encounter to the police because she knows this is something that could result in a terrible consequence. It's about 9:15 a.m. when Freeman parks his four-wheel drive in the emergency lane of Melbourne's West Gate Bridge. It's terrifying. That bridge, just on an impending level, is scary to behold. He parks near the highest point. He puts his hazards on, so bear that in mind. He puts his hazards on. What does that tell you? What does that tell you about his mindset? I mean, if you're in a chaotic state, if you're losing your mind, if you're somebody who just has no computation with reality, why would you pull over and put your hazards on? That seems like a really cogent thing to do. Apparently the highest point, well, if you're in such a confused state, if you're zoned out, if you don't know what's going on, why would you know where the highest point was? And then, and this is something that the rage I feel as I verbalize this is impossible to get across to you. But just know, somewhere in me there is this guttural anger that I feel for what he does. So this gorgeous little girl, this 4-year-old girl, excited about her day at school, excited about going and getting her uniform, excited that she's going to be with her older brother, excited to see her mummy. This little girl who trusts her daddy, who runs to her daddy, who loves her father, who believes that they have a great relationship. He coaxes her out of the car. She trusts him. She's probably scared. She's high up. This hasn't happened before. But this man who's going to gather her in his arms, they are the arms that she has known all her 4 years. They're the arms that will have picked her up and cuddled her goodnight. The arms that will have picked her up when she's fallen and grazed her knee. The arms that will have carried her to bed when she's been too tired to walk. Those same arms he uses to carry this gorgeous little girl to the edge of the bridge. And then he just threw her off. This is in front of rush hour traffic. It was about a 58-metre fall. She was 4. That little girl's last moments would have just been chaos. Just like that psychologist said about him. Just chaos. Daddy's carrying me. Daddy makes me feel safe. Daddy's throwing me. I'm falling. And then she hits the Yarra River. And people are watching this. People are watching this unfold. People think he's thrown a doll into the water because no one can get their head around the fact this could actually be a child. Some people have connected straight away, but others are like, this isn't real. Because your brain cannot compute such evil. You just go into work. And then this excuse for a human being, let alone a father, which is a privileged title, has taken this child and hurled her off a bridge. Not just in front of all of these strangers who would have done anything to protect her if they had the chance, also in front of Darcy's 2 brothers. That's the last image they have of their sister being thrown. He then just drove away from the bridge. And now Darcy's protective big brother, 6 years old, even he in that moment dealing with that trauma, seeing that thing happen, all he's thinking about is, my God, we need to save Darcy. Darcy needs to be okay. And he's begging his father to go back. And you know what his father said? Darcy can't swim. So again, we're not talking about somebody who doesn't compute reality. We're not talking about somebody who's struggling with their environment. We're not talking about someone who is in some kind of break where he doesn't understand what's happening. Not only has he found the highest point, not only has he put his hazards on, he's now telling the child who's begging to go back to try to save his sister that the reason he did it is because Darcy couldn't swim, so there's no point. That man then drove to the Commonwealth Law Court, sits in the Central Business District, and at this point he ends up trying to hand his 2-year-old son, Jack, to security staff, and apparently at this point he becomes distressed, he becomes unresponsive, apparently he's shaking, he's crying, and people are obviously aware that something terrible is going on and playing out. But even though that's what's happened, just think about somebody who's done what I've just talked about, and then reflecting on the reality of that. So he wants to hurt that little girl. He wants to make somebody pay. He's really angry and women deserve to pay. His ex deserves to pay. So he's now killed her. He has no doubt about that. Like he said, she can't swim. But now the adrenaline's kicked in. Now the enormity of his action and the consequence of his action, that's starting to kick in. So he's shaking and crying. I don't think that's got anything to do with mental health. I think that's to do with self-distress about his own actions and what that's going to do to his life. At this point, because there are so many concerns about the fact he's trying to hand this child over, the police are contacted and Freeman then gets arrested at the complex because information has gone out that a 4-year-old child has been thrown off a bridge. Now, bear in mind, the moment that Darcy was thrown from that height, multiple witnesses rang the police and they very quickly find her. She was found at the base of the bridge by paramedics. Bear in mind, that little girl didn't die instantly. That little girl fought for her life. It takes my breath away that 4-year-old little girl died alone in terror and pain. It is devastating.
Yes, good morning to you. I'm on the Westgate Bridge at the moment. I've just been witness to someone throwing their child over the bridge.
So Westgate Bridge.
On the Westgate Bridge, leading into the city.
Okay, so you're going inbound towards the city?
Yeah, inbound towards the city, yes.
Okay.
The guy's driven off, but we got his registration, and we can see the child floating in the water, yeah?
Yeah,
Okay.
male.
A male? And was there anyone else in the car?
I couldn't see. I was just
So
driving
you've
past.
thrown a child, did you say?
Yes.
Give me a description of the driver first, of the vehicle.
Male, I don't know, the male was about mid-40s.
Mid-40s, yeah.
About 6 foot, medium to solid build, and blonde to sort of receding hair. I can't be sure. A white 4-wheel drive vehicle, I think it was a Toyota Land Cruiser.
The police, of course, and the paramedics, who apparently were all really quite badly affected by this particular case, they're desperately trying to revive her. At this point, they transport her by air to the Royal Children's Hospital, but she doesn't eventually survive her injuries. She's confirmed deceased at 1:35 p.m. After he was arrested, he just doesn't want to talk. Apparently he was curled in the fetal position, he's trembling, he's dribbling, and no one was able to get him to talk. Even his parents apparently came and they couldn't coax a word from him. But some people will say that's because he's dealing with serious mental health issues, and that's demonstrating the fact that he's almost catatonic. And they are actually some of the words that have been used by police who dealt with him. Equally, if you know what you've done, if you know what an evil person you are, if you've gone through with the most dreadful plan, then how are you going to explain it anyway? Isn't it easier to just look like you're having a really bad time, not say anything, shake, feel sorry for yourself? Because that could confuse the situation. Maybe you're not in your right mind, but you were in your right mind. So your actions until that point suggested that you knew what you were doing. In a police statement by Freeman's ex-wife, Peta Barnes, this is 2 days after Darcy's death, she said that she thought maybe, retrospectively, he was suffering some form of depression. And I would agree. He probably was quite depressed. After all, he wasn't getting his own way. His life had fell apart. He was struggling. But are we actually going to even believe for a second that depression causes people to do this? I appreciate psychotic depression can get people to do awful things, but that's not how he was acting. Believe me, having dealt with that in my own personal life and lost to that in my own personal life, it's just not how it plays out. Darcy's death absolutely blindsided the country. No one, literally no one, could understand how a father could do this to their own daughter. And Darcy's family came out and talked about what an absolutely belter of a little girl she was. They really did come out and pay tribute to her. They talked about the fact that she loved ballet, that she was really determined, that she was somebody that when she wanted something, she went for it. And even though she was only 4, she had that determination and spirit about her. Apparently she was known to just break into dance and song, and she had a massive passion for music. Tie Me Kangaroo Down was one of her favourite songs, and the fact that she had that independence really early on speaks of resilient nature. Apparently she had a really strong will. She stood up even at 4 years of age for everything she believed in, and One of the things that was really telling is that every single person who came out and spoke about her was that they said her brothers and she had such a bond. She absolutely adored them. In a statement by the absolutely bereft, devastated family, they said they felt an extreme sense of loss and emptiness. They also expressed gratitude for the widespread public support because it was massive. I mean, Australia, I love Australia. Just love Australia. I really regret not carrying on with my sponsorship when I was a young person and had that opportunity. But you know, we do these things and then regret them in the future for the rest of our lives. But genuinely, I love the community in Australia. And I've lived in quite a lot of different places. I appreciate some people will disagree with me. Everyone's got the right option. But for me, there was just something truly connected. And when things go wrong, people really stand together. And there was just such public support. And her mother actually put a notice in the newspaper saying, "My darling daughter, my heart will always be with you as you will be with me. We will miss you every day and remember you with love and laughter." Her grandparents also added a really touching tribute. It said, "Taken so tragically at such a tender age, you will never be forgotten, Darcy. We will love you forever." And you can just feel, can't you, the love in those sentiments. But also, when I think about that grandma picking up that stroller and whacking that man in the back when she felt that her grandchild was at risk, I can really feel the absolute connection that she and her husband absolutely felt with those grandchildren. And what a harrowing thing to have to manage the memory of those last moments of your beloved grandchild's life. And the same where mother is concerned. In fact, I think it was really grown of the mother in this case to say, well, on reflection, I think he was very, very depressed. I think that she is giving him the privilege of sympathy and empathy. And I genuinely believe that I do not have such a compassionate bone in my body. I genuinely like to be a forgiving person. I genuinely like to be a kind person. I try my best. You know, sometimes I fail. We're all shades of everything. But when it comes down to my children, I would never forgive. And you would better hope to be locked up forever. And let me tell you, in the afterlife, even when you're in hell, you won't be safe. That's how I feel, and a lot of you feel the same. In court, when it came down to the proceedings, he actually pled not guilty by reason of insanity. Of course he did. By reason of mental impairment. Why not? Just go for it. You know, completely compos mentis when I carried out the crime. Afterwards, on reflection, decided I needed to do, I don't know, a bit of method acting. Well, hopefully I'll get away with it. Basically, what happened in court was he accepted that he had caused Darcy's death, but he denied remembering what he'd done. "I'm so sorry. I've just forgotten. I've forgotten everything." So what's that? You're saying that you don't remember anything. I remember nothing. Do you remember anything at all? Well, I remember everything before. I remember everything afterwards, just not the bit where I'm massively responsible. Does that not feel a little bit convenient? Absolutely. It's massively convenient. But at the end of the day, it's just the way it played out. Really sorry. Just throw the book immediately, physically at this person. But that's what it's saying. Now, according to the prosecution, they came out very strong, I would say, with a similar mindset that I have in this video. They said that the act of throwing his daughter off the Westgate Bridge was conscious, voluntary and deliberate, and that it just happened to have come after his wife was given the extended custody arrangement and that he'd had his hours reduced. Oh, how strange. He doesn't get what he wants and then he ends up killing his child. One could assume that maybe he was, I don't know, punishing the mother, punishing the angry women of this world. Now, his defence team, well, they went for the absolute opposite. They said, listen, this guy, he's mad. He's not bad. He's mad. He's not bad. He's just mad. But he's not bad. So what's your definition of mad? People who've lost their minds. Are you saying that people who are clinically, shall we say, insane can just go around killing people and we'll just accept that that's just because they've got some kind of mental illness? Yes, they're mad. So you're suggesting that mad people want to kill people? Yes, but they're not bad. I think he could be a touch insane, but also really bad. I think he's both mad and bad at the very best. And in my opinion, I think he's just bad. Yes, well, you're not fighting the defence, are you, Emma? So you can trot off with your ideas. So anyway, that's what he's going for. He's mad, not bad. Can we just be real about this? He threw his 4-year-old little girl to her death off a bridge of 58 metres high. I don't even... Oh, I can't compute it. Honestly, I can't compute it. I keep thinking about how she must have been in that moment. I do that quite a lot with these cases, but there's just something about this one that just feels so utterly abandoning in that moment, you know, by the man that she thought loved her. Also, the defence said, listen, we know he did a really terrible thing. He committed a, quote, horror, but it's not his fault. That's what they're saying. Oh, he did it, but it's not actually his fault. Whose fault is it then? Whose fault is it? It was said that Freeman, as I said, had no memory of the incident. They said that at the time he couldn't distinguish between right and wrong, although he could apparently put his hazards on because he knew that would be breaking some kind of motoring law. So it does feel like he knew where the highest point of the bridge was. So he did know where that was, which means that he knew that was right. But apparently when it comes down to him actually doing the crime, apparently that he didn't know was wrong. And then when his son was specifically thinking, we go back and look after our sister and your daughter, he was like, oh no, because she can't swim, so I know she's drowned. So it's really weird that he has this ability to selectively know what's right and selectively know what's wrong and ultimately not be culpable because apparently all the things that he did super wrong, they're the things that he's not responsible for. Anyway, when it came down to the prosecution and also the courts themselves, they brought in 6 psychiatrists. So he was interviewed by 6 psychiatrists to talk about whether this was possible, and there was only one. Only one. Uno individual. And let's be honest, that's a pretty low bar, isn't it? 1 out of 6. You know, if it was 3 out of 6, 2 out of 6, but 1 out of 6 means 5 of them were like, this guy isn't mad at all. But I think we will go down the line of using the word bad where this is concerned. So only one of the psychiatrists who interviewed Freeman agreed with the assertions by the defence. Professor Graham Burrows, he likened Freeman's state to that of a sleepwalker on the morning of Darcy's death. So that doctor said he was at the severe end of disassociation and said he really didn't know what was going on. Sorry? Can you just explain that to me? Well, he really didn't know what was going on. Did he not? No, he didn't know. He's totally innocent. He's mad, but he's not bad. How have you got evidence that he didn't know what was going on? Because he told me. Did he tell you anything else? No, he told me that he did not remember anything. Can we just go through a few details? Yes. So if he didn't know what was going on, why did he drive to the highest point of the bridge? Why did he put his hazards on after he actually had parked up? Yes, that seems a little bit odd. What about coaxing his poor girl from the back seat so he could go ahead and throw her off a bridge? Well, I'm saying that when you say it like that, it does seem a little like he knew what was going on, but I'm saying no, he didn't know what was going on. I'm just gonna discount all of your testimony and listen to the ones who actually spoke in some kind of real-time talk of reality. So I'm going to go with the other 5. Thank you very much. Okay. Anybody want a Barbie? Sorry, that was very stereotypical. I did love living in Australia, and I don't think that having a barbecue would be appropriate at this point. I'm just trying to highlight it doesn't make sense to me that that guy would be like, he didn't know what was going on when he did all the things I've just said. However, fortunately, consultant psychiatrist Yvonne Skinner said that Freeman's actions fitted 100% what is known as spousal revenge. And I know some of you will have had this. I know that some of you out there will have been in a situation where your exes will have done horrendous things to you. I'm not talking about killing your kids. I'm talking about doing awful things to you because they are so vengeful that the relationship is over and they feel like there has been an injustice because maybe you've had to financially split things and so on and so forth, and they can't bear it. It festers and it dislodges within their psyche the right and wrong morality that should exist. They can't bear it. It's that ultimately connects them to what they do. 5, in fact, of those 6 experts said Freeman, yes, was probably anxious, was probably stressed during the drive. And we all know that when you're anxious and stressed, if you are a violent person, it's going to make you more violent. But that would not constitute the disease of the mind that the defence were trying to push. Also, the witness stand was taken up by so many different people who had witnessed the actual event. This poor child being thrown to a death. They were horrified. Many of the witnesses talked about the what ifs. They were saying, what if we could have changed it? Why didn't we intervene? They blamed themselves when there was absolutely clearly no one to blame but Freeman himself. But that's what we see here. Human beings who couldn't do anything, couldn't save that child, blaming themselves because they would have done anything too. And the man on the stand who did it, wanting to get away with it. Because ultimately that's what he wanted. He wanted to get away with it. He wanted to be seen as some victim in this circumstance. Testimony was also absolutely heartbreakingly given by Darcy's then 6-year-old brother. They played a video in the court and his little legs are kicking back and forth during the video. He said he was playing games in the backseat of the car. He and Darcy were playing together. There were books, there were crayons. His little brother was just drinking from a bottle. And then he said, as this was just such a normal experience, that when the car stopped on the bridge, it kind of brought him to attention. He then said that his father asked Darcy to please climb in the front seat. He then on that video said then everything happened. And the very fact that he says everything happened, it's such a telling statement. That's a child who is so overwhelmed with the horror of what they've experienced and endured that it's too much to break it down. So they just give you that whole comment of everything happened, like everything changed. The world as he knew it just absolutely collapsed. Because for that little 6-year-old boy, he didn't just lose his sister. He wasn't just traumatized by watching the end of her life. He was losing his life as he knew it. Everything that had ever been is now dissolved into everything that will become. And he has to manage that as a 6-year-old enduring trauma, losing his father, losing his sister in different ways, but equally as catastrophic in so many ways. And it's harrowing. Freeman's father actually said that his son's mental health had suffered serious deterioration since 2007. He said that his son had become paranoid. He said that he was confused, he was anxious. He also had said, however, that recently his son seemed to be improving. But again, sometimes people can seemingly seem less pissed off with their world when they make some really awful decisions. So if you ultimately are really angry with somebody, you think, I'm going to make you pay. When you come to a conclusion, well, this is how I'm going to do it, it can make you ultimately change the way that you are to other people because you kind of feel quite at peace with the decision that you've made. So it could just be that he was ready to make somebody pay heavily for daring to leave him, and that's why his mood lifted. The jury had to listen to the autopsy. It's harrowing. There was an inventory of that little girl's injuries, an inventory of the injuries to the brain, the heart, the spleen, to the blood in her ears and nose. Now, at this point, when it's being described in court, Freeman's whimpering, is weeping, is drinking water, is scrubbing his face with a hanky. It's all very much about him. Also, it's worth noting that during the case, at times he didn't want to be in court. He stripped off his clothes in a van when he was en route to court one morning. Also, he refused one time to leave his holding cell. Throughout that trial, however, in spite of that behaviour, which suggests that he didn't want to be on show and probably didn't want to hear the information that was being talked to about him, he never once said he was sorry. Not once. Not once. So he's mad, not bad. Well, at this point, he'd have received the treatment. At this point, he's seen lots of psychiatrists. But at this point, in spite of knowing what he did to that child, in spite of hearing the injuries that he inflicted on her, that doesn't bring him to a point where he wants to say, my God, what did I do? I'm so sorry. Not one shred of compassion, responsibility, empathy. The trial lasted 19 days. And then there was 5 days of deliberation. At this point, the jury rejected the defence of not guilty by reason of mental impairment. And that meant that Freeman was indeed, as far as I'm concerned, rightly so, found guilty of Darcy's murder. Now, the fact there was 5 days of deliberation means that there must have been some people on that jury who were on the fence regarding whether he was indeed guilty of murder, but thankfully it came through with that particular verdict. When that verdict was read out, he remained motionless, his hands were clasped, and the verdict was given without him really giving any intonation about his feeling. But again, I understand in certain circumstances when you're hearing this kind of overwhelming information, you don't necessarily have an instant reaction. It's psychologically pretty challenging to hear something that says you're going to be in prison for a very long time and people didn't believe you, and to process that can sometimes mean that you are quite still.
What Darcy's last thoughts might have been does not bear thinking about, and her death must have been a painful and protracted one. Any motive which existed for the killing had nothing to do with the innocent victim. It can only be concluded that you used your daughter in an attempt to hurt your former wife as profoundly as possible. You did what you did. You are responsible for it, and nobody else is. Your conduct is a most fundamental breach of trust, and it's an attack on the institution of the family, which is so dear to the community. It follows that you brought the broader community into this case in a way that's rarely, if ever, been seen before. It offends our collective conscience. You will spend what may be regarded by many as the best years of your life in prison.
Also, though, interesting that this is at a point where clearly his mental health is considered okay, and he's kind of acting in a similar way to how he was when his father asked whether he should maybe go with him to take the children to school that day, because he's just in himself. He's not externalising, he's internalising. So I guess that is kind of in keeping with who he is as a human being, which is again why I'm not buying into this idea that he's just somebody who lost his mind for a moment. Also, I feel dreadfully sorry for his father, who wanted to go with him and drive those children to school with his son because he was worried about him, and he got denied that option, and that little girl died. Now, the prosecutors, they didn't want to show any leniency whatsoever. They wanted him jailed for life without any parole. The defence had, of course, pleaded for the minimum term. Now, before he was handed a sentence, the judge, who was Justice Coughlin, that judge made a 40-minute statement. Boy, that judge had a lot to say, and rightfully so. And I have real respect for this particular judge. He said, "You have not shown remorse or even begun to understand the enormity of your brutal crime. You're yet to say sorry for what you've done. Your attitude to these matters remains self-centred. I regard your prospects of rehabilitation as bleak." He also said that Freeman's actions were aggravated by an act breaching the basic trust of father and child, and that it had destroyed the lives of so many others. He said this was a killing of an innocent child. The circumstances of the killing were horrible. The throwing of your 4-year-old daughter from a bridge more than 80 metres above the ground could not be more horrible. What Darcy's last thoughts might have been does not bear thinking about. And her death must have been a painful and protracted one. He said that Freeman's actions were a fundamental breach of trust and an attack on the institution of family. He said it can only be concluded that you used your daughter in an attempt to hurt your former wife as profoundly as possible. He also said that Freeman couldn't have chosen a more public place. He said it had offended the sensibility of the entire community. He said the lives of Darcy's mother and many others will never be the same again. In describing the impact on others, Justice Coughlin said, "Emergency services, witnesses and the community as a whole have been affected by Darcy's death, by having the events forced upon them." He also went on to talk in detail about how he felt Freeman had killed his daughter to get revenge on his former wife. On the 11th of April 2011, Arthur Freeman was sentenced to life in prison with a non-parole period of 32 years. When he was handing down that sentence, the judge said he understood the argument that he should be locked away forever. That's the one that I believe would have been appropriate, but I get it. I'm not in charge of the world. Wish I was. I do feel people would be very happy with some of the consequences, but I am not in charge of the world, so I have to understand where the judge is coming from. But he basically said that as a judge, he was obliged to consider other factors, so that's why he'd given him that length. He said, whatever happens, you will spend what many consider will be the best years of your life in prison. And he also went on to say that he didn't think that Freeman was beyond redemption. I'm going to throw it out there. I think that he is beyond redemption, and I think that when he takes his last breath and they remove him from wherever he is, that he will be taking a quick elevator to a very fiery pit. But the judge may see something better in this man than I have the capacity to see. He also took into account good behaviour, family support, references, etc. He said the earliest date you can be released is 29th of January 2041, when you will be 67 years old. But that means, as long as he survives, he will get to live life on the outside far longer, indeed, than his daughter ever had the chance to do. Throughout that hearing, Freeman showed no reaction. When he was sentenced, though, he had the weirdest thing to say. So he had this massive outburst. He accused his ex-wife's family of being members of a group who were implicated in the theft of diamonds from a West Australian mine, and also federal police phone taps. He also mentioned death threats to himself during this rant. He actually had to be pulled from the courtroom by 3 security guards. So, not very stable, even if he is sane. Still obviously convinced that women are very angry and that maybe we were all together involved in some kind of criminal schemes. I don't know. But what I'm saying is, ultimately, when he was given that sentence, it was a little bit too much for him, and he was like, well, if I'm going down, I'm going to let the world know just how weird my ex-wife's family is and how they're really in the criminal underworld. Of course, nobody accepted any of that, but it was bizarre. Darcy's mother and Freeman's former wife, Peta Barnes, they didn't actually show any emotion at the sentencing. And I guess that part of that is because they're very conflicted. This was a guy that Peta loved, and her mother will obviously just want to support her daughter, and they've gone through the biggest loss you could ever endure. I would imagine that you feel pretty spent emotionally at this point. Several of the members of the jury that convicted Freeman actually also went to the sentencing hearing, and when that happens, it's because people actually want to watch that person go down. It's really powerfully important to them that the individual victim gets the justice that they deserve. Peta Barnes and the Barnes family in general, they didn't actually make any comment as they left the court. Neither did Freeman's parents, who were obviously victims in this as well. God bless them. And since his sentencing, of course, he's tried to appeal his life sentence. Never apologised for what he did, but appealed his life sentence. In fact, he said it's severe. It's a severe sentence. Well, you know what, Mr. Freeman? You want to think yourself damn lucky that Emma Kenny and her viewers don't get to decide your fate as well as you think it's severe. We have several more ideas of what could be a more severe penalty awaiting you if we were given the option to inflict it. You know, is it actually severe that you get to walk free one day when your baby girl got thrown off a bridge and died horrifically? Fortunately, he has failed in his appeals, and rightfully so. But I'm sorry, that's what I feel when I hear somebody like this. I hear a man who is not culpable at this point in his own mind for what he did, and he deserves, as far as he is concerned, more lenient sentencing. In 2012, Darcy's mother, Peta Barnes, she launched a civil action in the Victoria Supreme Court. She alleged basically that there had been long-time warnings about the need for safety barriers on the bridge where her daughter was killed. That was actually settled for an undisclosed amount. So it must have been agreed that those barriers should have been present, and that beautiful little girl should never have had the opportunity to have been thrown by this predator over the bridge. Now, in 2015, this is 6 years after Darcy's death, a Victorian coroner handed down the findings from an inquest. That coroner found that no one could have predicted her father was going to murder her. I think we all agree with that. They found that her father was solely to blame. A GP did actually tell the inquest that they didn't have any concerns about the children. They hadn't witnessed any worrying behaviour from Freeman. Also, 2 other GPs who treated Peta, Freeman and Darcy also said they didn't see anything to suggest Darcy or her siblings were at harm, and the coroner made no adverse findings against the GPs or other professionals who saw Darcy and her father, but they did say that there was indeed scope generally for better training around the risk of family violence. And I think often in my videos we talk about the chain of causation, the failures of the authorities around individuals who lose their lives. But in this one, I have to say that it felt like everything was happening in the right direction. He was getting restricted some access because the psychologist who'd interviewed him felt uncertain about him. They obviously wanted to see how it would go for a period of time, so they were doing their job there. The mother was clearly a loving, connected mother who still wanted a relationship with her ex, even if that was difficult. And to all intents and purposes, there was a level of this coming like a bolt from the blue. But when you think about the red flags, they certainly existed in the relationship and in some of the spontaneous actions this man seemed to engage in, including when the mother thought he might throw the baby into the fire pit. So I'd love to know your thoughts on this case. It blows my mind that we've literally covered a case where a father who was meant to love his child coaxed her out of a car and threw her off a bridge to her death in the most horrific of ways. That poor child, she's beautiful, beautiful little girl, beautiful family. God, it's devastating. Let me know your thoughts, guys, and as ever, look after yourselves. Be safe.